At any given moment, there were different times where it was difficult to write and difficult to look back on certain times in my 10 plus years with but at the same time, Marvin was a man. He was a human being who had flaws, just like we all do.
This is a song about a beautiful little girl, a girl I love. We did it on our album. We thought you'd enjoy.
What if I told you there was a secret, something so explosive it shook Marvin Gaye's life to its core that his wife, Janis, carried with her to the end? The drama, the betrayals, the heartbreak, it's all wrapped up in this tangled web of love, fame, and chaos.
And letting people know that I was no saint.
From forbidden love and scandalous affairs to a betrayal that cut deeper than most could imagine, we're diving into the shocking truths behind Marvin and Janice's turbulent relationship and the messy secret she never let go of. Get ready, because this is the tea you didn't know you needed. Let's unravel it. So, Janis Gaye and Teddy Pendergrass. Yeah, that Teddy Pendergrass, the affair is basically the stuff of legend when it comes to Janis's marriage to Marvin Gaye. It added to the already boiling drama between them and definitely played a role in the emotional roller coaster Marvin went through, especially in his album, Here My Dear. You could almost hear the pain in the music. That whole situation? Majorly messy. It all went down when she and Marvin were both in the middle of some serious chaos. Marvin was going through it, battling mental health struggles, and of course his cheating. He was falling apart in so many ways. On Janis's side, things weren't any better. She was young, and the whole Marvin situation was admittedly a lot to deal with, and we'll come back to that in detail. With all the drama between her and Marvin, Janis turned to Teddy for some comfort. But this wasn't just a fling. Nah, this was a legit affair that dragged on for a while, making the drama between Janis and Marvin even worse. Marvin was already dealing with his own mess, and then here's Teddy, cozying up to Janis while Marvin's falling apart.
Were you noticing the drug use and kind of his decline and so forth around that time?
I was with Marvin damn near every day, man. Yeah, was I noticing it? Yeah. No, yeah, I was definitely noticing it.
It just made the tension between them explode, pushing them even further apart. You can imagine the kind of drama that came with that. So, Marvin, yeah, he was heated when he found out about the affair. The jealousy, the anger. It was all there, mixed with a ton of heartbreak. The betrayal only made the emotional storm he was already in even worse. And he didn't exactly keep that pain to himself. He poured it all into his music. You can hear all that raw emotion in his album, Here My Dear, which is basically his musical diary about Janis and their marriage falling apart. Tracks like When Did You Stop Loving Me? When Did I Stop Loving You? Are basically him letting us in on the heartache and betrayal he felt, making it clear how much that affair hit him.
So it turns out to be lies. If you don't honor.
Teddy was absolutely killing it in the late 70s. He had that voice, smooth as silk, that practically oozed charisma and soul, and it was all over the charts. Before his solo career really took off, Teddy was a key part of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. Those early years with the group helped shape his signature sound and gave him the kind of stage presence that turned heads. With the Blue Notes, Teddy wasn't just another lead singer. He was the guy who brought that extra spark to songs like If You Don't Know Me By Now and Bad Luck. His powerful, emotional delivery made those tracks unforgettable, and it's no surprise he started catching the eye of fans and industry bigwigs alike. By the late 70s, he was ready to go solo, and when he dropped his self-titled debut album in 1977, people knew he was a star in the making. His solo career really took off with hits like Close the Door and Turn Off the Lights, tracks that showcased not just his velvety vocals, but his ability to command a room.
Just turn off the light.
The combination of his good looks, undeniable talent, and that voice made him one of the most sought-after artists in R&B. Teddy was the definition of smooth, and he was quickly becoming one of the biggest names in the game. Word on the street is he and Marvin were, like, friends, but that affair. It wasn't just a betrayal of Marvin's marriage to Janis, but also of their friendship. We don't know every little detail of what went down, but it's pretty obvious that Marvin was crushed by it. That whole mess became a major factor in the breakdown of his marriage. Now, all this is sounding a lot like Janis is the bad guy here, doesn't it? Wait, stay with me here, there's more to the story. But let's talk about another affair she had with another high-profile celebrity, Mr. Rick James.
Hey, lady, come on, girl. Give it to me, baby. Give it to me.
Marvin and Janice were living apart by now, but Rick James was ready to swoop in and take advantage of the situation. He invited Janice to see him perform at the LA Coliseum, clearly trying to make his move. But Janice wasn't having it. She brought some friends along, probably to make sure Rick didn't get any funny ideas. Classic move, right? Rick, though, was feeling himself. He thought this was his chance to take over as the new big shot of Motown, since Marvin's star was starting to fade. So what does he do? He decides it's the perfect time to try and slide into Marvin's territory, aka his wife. Even though Marvin and Janice were living apart, it was still a bold play. And of course, Rick wasn't shy about it. He knew Marvin wasn't treating Janice well, and he was all too happy to step in and show her some real attention. It didn't take long before the two were officially a thing. But here's the kicker. Rick, always with a bit of drama, eventually tells Janice that they can't keep sneaking around and that she needs to go back to her husband. What a mess. Rick became the godfather to her daughter, Nona. Their whole dynamic is laid out in Janice's memoir, After the Dance, where she opens up about her bond with Rick and how much he impacted her life. It's a real behind-the-scenes look at their connection and the role he played in her world. Okay, so, a little background on Janis. She first met Marvin in 1973 during a recording session for Let's Get It On. At the time, Marvin was still married to Anna Gordy, yes, Motown founder Berry Gordy's sister, and Janis was just 17, while Marvin was 34.
Well, my mother dated Ed Townsend, who co-wrote Let's Get It On.
Wow.
And had dated Ed for years. And Ed happened to be recording Let's Get It On and some other vocal tracks at the Moet.
Marvin wrote Jan for her.
This is a song about a beautiful little girl. A girl I love. We did it on our album. We thought you'd enjoy.
Featured her on background vocals for his disco hit Got to Give It Up, and poured his feelings into the I Want You album, which was practically a love letter to her. The two tied the knot in 1977. Janis wasn't just his muse. She had an eye for style, too. She put together Marvin's unforgettable look from his 1974 Oakland Coliseum performance. The red watch cap, beaded denim shirt, and those iconic silver boots with red laces. Talk about a fashion moment. Their marriage lasted until 1981, and just a few years later, Marvin tragically lost his life in an altercation with his father. In 2015, Janis shared her story in her memoir, After the Dance, My Life with Marvin Gaye. Janis came from a musical family herself. Her dad was Slim Gaillard, the guy behind the hit Flatfoot Floogie with a Floy Floy.
The fat fleet Fuji with the floor, the floor joy, the floor joy, the floor joy, the floor.
Janis also managed her daughter, Nona Gaye's career. Nona, who's had a solid run as a singer and actress, Ally, Crash, and the Matrix films.
It's always brought me luck. Maybe it'll bring me.
Said her mom always kept Marvin's legacy alive and made sure everyone understood the man behind the music. Okay, so she was 17 when she scored an intro to the great Marvin Gaye. Thanks to Ed Townsend, she ended up at one of Marvin's recording sessions, like I said before.
Well, my mother dated Ed Townsend, who co-wrote Let's Get It On.
Wow.
And had dated Ed for years. And Ed happened to be recording Let's Get It On and some other vocal tracks at the Moet.
Sparks? Oh, they flew immediately. Age gap? What age gap? She was 17, he was 34, twice her age, but apparently nobody batted an eye. Different times.
Well, I was at that time I was 16.
Wow.
And by the time I met Marvin, I had just turned.
Oh, and the fact that Marvin was married? Yeah, that didn't stop anything either. And not just married to anyone, by the way. We're talking Anna Gordy, as in the sister of Motown's big boss. If anyone should have thought twice, it probably should have been Marvin, considering, you know, his whole career was tied to the Gordy family. But hey, love, or whatever that was, doesn't care about the fine print, right? So here's where things really take a nosedive. Divorces, breakdown, and of course, messy drama. Janis teamed up with writer David Ritz, the guy behind Divided Soul, The Life of Marvin, to make sure her side of the story was heard loud and clear. Oh, and by the way, if you missed it, that book also inspired a video titled Marvin Gaye slept with his teenage niece and she had his child. Yeah, let that sink in. But hold up, stay with me because things are about to get even messier. When Janis first walked into the studio with Ed Townsend, Marvin's producer, she was hit with all the feels. Imagine meeting your lifelong idol, the man you've been low-key obsessed with since you were like 8 years old. She didn't just admire him, though. She straight up wrote that hearing his voice erased all pain. And honestly, considering the stuff she'd been through growing up, it kinda makes sense why she latched onto him. Now, let's be real. Lots of teenage girls crush on famous guys, but actually meeting them? That's a whole different game. And Marvin? Well, let's just say he wasn't exactly putting up any boundaries.
17th power?
And upon meeting this iconic figure that you have been infatuated about, now he's standing in front of you. You meet him, you go into the studio. Are you mesmerized even more?
Absolutely.
Now must have been a wildly different time then, right? Because tell me how Marvin, a whole grown man, felt so bold about openly showing his feelings for 17-year-old Janis. Like, dude, you've got a wife and kid at home. And let's not forget, his in-laws were basically the gatekeepers of his career and bank account. But nope, Marvin decided to kick things off with 17-year-old Janis as his side piece. He even took her to this Italian spot and slipped the waiter $20 to sneak her some Let that sink in. A grown man bribing someone so his teenage girlfriend could drink. Make it make sense. So, I guess, naturally, Marvin started hooking up with this teenager. The place barely had anything going for it. Just a couch and some guy named Abe crashing on it. And get this, Marvin had the nerve to call Abe, a full-on junkie, his assistant. Sure, Marvin. Meanwhile, Janis was so caught up in the fact that she was with Marvin that she missed all the red flags that would have been glaringly obvious to most grown women. Well, not all grown women because, you know, it was Marvin. Marvin even tried to convince Janis to ditch high school altogether so they could spend all their time together. His pitch? I'll be your teacher. I'll teach you everything you need to know, and I'll be way more patient and loving than any teacher at school. What?
So I did my best to, you know, just keep his spirits up and continue to reassure him.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just about keeping her around. Marvin was jealous of the boys her age. According to Janis, he straight up told her, I don't want to share you. Those high school football players are my competition. Imagine being so insecure about teenagers when you're a grown man. The longer Janis stuck around, the more red flags started popping up. Marvin's behavior just kept getting uglier. One time, Marvin swung by Janis's school to pick her up, and on the way, he casually dropped, "Oh, I need to make a quick stop." That stop? His wife's house. To grab his son. Yes, his wife's house. While Marvin went inside, Janis stayed in the car, feeling all kinds of nervous. She may have been young, but she knew exactly whose husband Marvin was. And just when she thought she could stay under the radar, out comes Anna Gordy herself, walking straight up to the car. She was clearly not about to let this slide. Anna ordered Janis to roll the window down, but Janis, smartly, barely cracked it an inch. And honestly, who could blame her? Anna, sizing her up like a pro, hit her with, "I just want to see what someone like you looks like." Ouch. Not long after that whole confrontation with Anna, Marvin got Janis pregnant. He was over the moon, constantly hyping up the idea of having a son. Like a daughter wasn't even on the table. Anytime Janis brought up the possibility of a girl, he just brushed it off. Sadly, Janis ended up losing that pregnancy. Marvin tried to comfort her with a, "Don't worry, next time God will give us a healthy boy." By the time she turned 18, Marvin had Janis fully locked in as a teenage mom-to-be. And yep, this was all happening while he was still married to Anna Gordy. When Janis gave birth, it wasn't the son Marvin kept talking about. It was a baby girl they named Nona. What's heartbreaking? Janis actually apologized to Marvin for having a daughter, like it was her fault or something. Marvin didn't hold back when it came to criticizing Janis's post-baby body. He even had the audacity to point out her stretch marks, saying something along the lines of, "There's gotta be a way to get rid of those, right?" But even with his harsh words, he didn't hesitate to make her a teen mom again the very next year. This time, they had the son Marvin had been waiting for, Frankie. So now, with 2 kids in the mix, you'd think things might calm down a bit. Nope. Family life at their house meant regular hangouts with George Clinton and Bernie Worrell from Parliament Funkadelic, playing basketball and dropping acid with Marvin. If that wasn't enough chaos, Marvin also made trips to Ike Turner's studio, where Ike casually carried his coke stash around in a suitcase. At home, Marvin was busy writing and producing music while he and Janis stayed high on both weed and coke. Honestly, if this was their day-to-day, imagine what a night out looked like. Janis had already had 2 of Marvin's kids, but they still weren't married yet. So at this point, she was around 19 or 20, and he was in his late 30s. One day, the 2 of them, along with some random couple, were all getting high and doing coke together. Then Marvin noticed the couple checking out Janis, and he said something like, "I think they want to take this to the next level, like a little private just what the doctor ordered." Apparently, Marvin wasn't just playing around. He was the doctor who made the call. He didn't physically join in, but he was definitely the one directing everything and watching it go down. Marvin was into watching his young girlfriend get with other people, even if she wasn't into it. Afterward, he asked her how she felt about it. Things got even crazier when Marvin started throwing Janis into wild situations with his industry friends and enemies. One night, they partied with Richard Pryor, who invited them to watch bikini dancers, do their thing with each other. Janis wasn't feeling it, but she went along with it anyway. Then, during another night with Pryor, things got super intense when he got so high, he hit his wife with a wine bottle and went off on everyone at the table, calling them all kinds of names, except Janis. Marvin thought it was funny and told her she should be flattered. Then there was the time Marvin tried to set Janis up with Frankie Beverly, the lead singer of Maze. Marvin seemed to get a kick out of pushing Janis toward other men, sometimes just to get a rise out of her, and other times to fuel his own jealousy. When Marvin noticed the chemistry between Janis and Frankie, he didn't hesitate to try to set them up. One day, Frankie came over and Marvin booked him a hotel room and a connecting room for Janis, pretending it was so he could focus on his music. Janis and Frankie were both super awkward about the whole thing, but that didn't stop them from smoking together in Janis's room. Just when things were getting interesting, Marvin knocked on the door, hoping to catch them in the act. But Frankie, not wanting to deal with Marvin, crawled back to his own room on all fours. Marvin found Janis alone and left disappointed. While he didn't get to see what he wanted, Janis made it clear that on her own terms, she did sleep with Frankie later on. Despite all the drama, Janis wasn't ready to walk away from Marvin yet, even though he kept being cold toward her. Right after they got married, Marvin told her he loved her, but wasn't in love with her. So at this point, you can safely assume that had to sting a lot. Marvin wasn't exactly winning any Husband of the Year awards. He cheated, and Janis kept quiet about it. By the time she hit 22, she wrote that she felt like her youth was gone for good. And Marvin didn't help. He seemed to enjoy making her feel insecure, saying things that would mess with her head. He also pulled some seriously shady moves. Take family vacations, for example. Marvin would plan a trip for everyone, Janis, the kids, the whole crew, but then ditch them. He'd fly out to Hawaii or wherever by himself, then call her up begging her to bring the kids and join him. This became his go-to move for vacations. Make plans, leave without them, then act like it was their fault for not being there. Their fights were next-level toxic, too. One time, while driving with their kids in the car, Marvin started swerving all over the road, threatening to drive them off it. That kind of chaos, day in and day out, pushed Janis to a point where she was ready to look for an escape. Poor girl ended up in the arms of another man. She had an affair with Frankie Beverly. So, while Janis was hooking up with Frankie Beverly, she decided to take things up a notch and really get under Marvin's skin. How? By having a fling with none other than the guy who was already stealing Marvin's spotlight as the ultimate soul music heartthrob, Teddy Pendergrass.
Let me give you what you've been waiting for.
And it wasn't some low-key thing either. Janis and Teddy were out there, snorting coke, going on dates, and making zero effort to keep it on the DL. Things got so bold that Marvin literally caught them mid-date at a restaurant. Instead of confronting them, though, he went full stalker mode and sat outside watching the whole thing. Awkward. Okay, so Marvin was a troubled man, obviously. Let's unpack that.
She answered the phone. She said, hello. And I said, hello. And she said, oh, baby, it's you. Because she recognized my voice. She said, yeah, I know why you called me, and it's true. She said, you know, his father shot him.
Okay, so, you ever heard the saying, hurt people, hurt people? Marvin's childhood wasn't exactly the picture of harmony. He grew up in a strict household under his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., who was a minister in a black Hebrew Israelite sect called the House of God. This group followed a super strict lifestyle, mixing beliefs from the Old and New Testaments. Fridays meant locking into an extended Sabbath starting at sundown and carrying on into Saturday. Marvin's dad had a no-nonsense approach to parenting.
His father was very strict with the kids, about when they could go out and when they had to be in, what they could wear. The girls weren't allowed to wear makeup, and he had very strong feelings against secular pop music.
Scratch that, it was downright abusive. Forget a minor slip-up like misplacing a hairbrush or running late. Anything could set his father off. His sister Jean revealed that Marvin would often push back against their dad, skipping church on Saturdays just to stir the pot. But the consequences? Brutal. Whippings were regular, and Marvin himself admitted there wasn't a part of his body that escaped being bruised by the time he hit 12. What made it worse was how drawn out the punishments were, with his dad forcing him to undress and making sure he heard every jingle of that belt buckle before it hit. The constant abuse left Marvin carrying some serious scars. He acted out to get attention, channeling all that hurt into rebellious and sometimes aggressive behavior. Marvin's life was full of talent and turmoil, and were a huge part of his struggles. He started with early on, then got into in the 60s. At first, he couldn't snort it, so he rubbed it on his gums or ate it. By the late 70s, he was addicted, freebasing in London and even using PCP. There were brief, sober moments, like his time in Belgium, but things got worse when he came back to the US. Paranoia took over. He thought people were after him, wore a bulletproof vest, and kept armed bodyguards. His autopsy later showed in his system. Marvin also dealt with deep depression, attempting multiple times. From trying to himself in Detroit to overdosing on in Hawaii, he struggled to escape the pain. Days before his death, he even tried jumping out of a car. In a final interview, he admitted feeling unloved and useless, showing just how heavy his battles were.